Sorry guys, Jay's in scripting land today. Oh, let me just turn my Skype off before everyone sees our messages. Yeah, I can hear you. Oh, and people are not going to hear what's on the stream because Richie forgot to press his button. Oh, and people are not going to hear what's on the stream because Richie forgot to press his button. That would have been interesting, actually. You could have heard you would have heard my mic and me breathing heavily, but you wouldn't have heard anything that was being said in world.
There, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay. I'm getting a bit of echo though.
Yeah, bad echo.
What does that come from? Am I still echoing? Yeah. What is that? Well, let's see if this works. Hey, screen share. I'm not sure why I'm echoing though.
This is what happens when you try and do demos, to get stuff across to you as quick as we can. Trying to set things up in a live scenario is sometimes tricky. Welcome back, Josh.
Can you hear me?
Yes, and
Okay.
no echo.
Hooray, no echo. All right. So we're on global. There's no echo. Maybe we can do this now.
You might need to just drop the mic sensitivity a bit, Josh. I think you're coming through a little bit distorted, but apart from that, you're good.
How's that?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, great. All right. So let me just get my chat up here and pull up Unity. Let me see here. Okay, so I have Unity up now. So for people who are new to the screen share thing, can everybody see my screen share behind me here?
Yes.
Okay, great. So you have a couple of options there. You can either just move your camera closer to the screen to see it, or if you look at the top of your screen and that toolbar that's there that says, one of those buttons says in world. And if you click on that, it'll actually switch to the video being on your screen instead, which might make it easier to see. It'll start out as a tiny thumbnail first, but if you click on that thumbnail, it'll make it larger. And either small or large, it will also have a full screen button in the top right corner of the thumbnail, and if you press that, it will literally take over your entire screen, so you can't see anything else. So may or may not be useful if you want to see chat there. I'm just going to keep mine in world, I think, because it doesn't really matter for me. So yeah, what you're seeing on my screen right now is actually it's actually the full viewer, but running inside of the editor. This is something that we do as developers. It's how we actually build the client, but it also is a good way to show pre-release features. So I'm actually just going to drop this down out of the way. Yeah, so I'm just going to log in here to the preview grid, I guess, make it easy. And then I have an example of a state machine that I've put together to demonstrate how it works. This is my very literal sandbox region that I was originally going to turn into a kind of full-scale game, but then never had the time. So now it's just the place where I test completely random stuff.
How come your region's better than my test region? My test region, I just put a cube down.
I have a couple of those too. Depends on how fast I want it to load. But though this region's better because, like I said, I originally had a completely different plan for it, and then it just became convenient to use over and over for testing completely random stuff. Of course, I've got greedy games over here. I've got some like audio reactive dance pads and NPCs in various stages of doing things, gallery components, just totally random stuff here. And the avatar I'm wearing right now was for another client project slash demo that we were doing. So yeah, I'm like on staging. I'm like a goth girl right now. But let me just drag out the state machine tester that I've got here. If I can figure out where I went. Camera's like way off the screen for some reason. And so I'm just going to drop this down here. If I go back and look at it, so this does a couple of things. One is you'll see there's a couple of cubes here, which is rather boring to start off with, but there's also some user interface elements here on the screen that are used for testing. So let's have a look at the component itself real quick. If we come over here, so this object just has a standard canvas on it, which has these buttons on it. On the canvas, it's got a button, and this is just a standard UI button that's been added. I hope everybody can see that. I realize the resolution on my screen may make that a little bit difficult to see. Let me see if I can I make that bigger? Might be if I just drop my resolution down here. Let's see. Can I just do like 1080? That's the wrong monitor. All right, let's try that. Maybe it'll be a little bit more readable there. Hopefully that helps a little bit with it being at a lower resolution. But so this is a standard button component that's attached here. And actually, here, let me try to redo my screen share. Oh no, it's still sharing my screen at is it sharing it at that resolution? Is it just because this monitor is also? Yeah, okay, that's just me. That's just me and my dual monitors. That's fine. Okay, so actually, I might need to change that. Is everybody else seeing it like a windowed with a black bar around it?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, Yeah, that's because the monitors are not consistent. Hold on a second. Let me switch them both to 1080, and that will go away. Keep changes. All right, how's that?
That's got it. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Um, all right, so you should be able to see on this object, I just have a button, and this button has no event bound to its click, which is fine. It actually still works that way, and I'll discuss that more in a second. But if we scroll down a little bit, we have um, this simple state machine component that's on here, and briefly, how this works is one thing you'll see is there's an auto bind to UI option on here. So if this is checked, which it is by default, then it will automatically attempt to attach itself to buttons, toggles, and drop downs that are on the same object. So because there's a button component here on the same object that has a state machine on it, then automatically this will work with the button without having to manually define any sort of action on the button. You can have them on separate objects, and you can have them not automatically bound, and there's doing that. One reason is uh, by default, for example, when it binds to a button, it's treated as a next button. So it's like next state, next state, next state every time you click it. You may instead want to have a button that goes previous state, or a button that jumps to a specific state instead of just cycling through them. So all of those options are available. But the meat of the component is down here. You've got machine state specified. So for this button, it actually has three states specified. It has the cube state, the sphere state, and the cylinder state. For each of these states, not only does it have an event, it actually has two events. It has an event that happens when that state is entered, and an event that happens when that state is left. And this greatly simplifies keeping those states independent, and not having each state doesn't necessarily have to know about the other state. So like if you were just doing this without a state machine, and you just had like two buttons, state one button, state two button, what you would have to do is in each of those buttons on click, you would have to say turn off everything related to the other state, and then turn on everything related to my state. And then the other button would have to do that in verse, turn off everything related to the first state and turn on everything related to the second state. And each button has to know not only how to turn on itself, but how to turn off every other state. And so in this case, that's no longer necessary. Each state knows how to turn itself off and turn itself on. So each state only has to worry about what's important for itself, not for everybody else. So for just quickly an example of how this works, just kind of really get you a better idea of what these three states are. When it's in the cube state, it turns the cube object on, and when it leaves the cube state, it turns that cube object off. If we go to the sphere state, it turns the sphere object on, and then when we leave the sphere state, it turns that object off. So you'll see here is if I just press this button to cycle through states, right now we're in the cube state because the cube is on. If I press this, the cube goes away because we left that state, then it itself off, and then we entered the sphere state, and so the sphere came on. And if we can just sit here, we can actually just cycle through these states using a single button. That button doesn't change. That button has no events tied with it, but by doing this, we can cycle through those states over and over again. You can see what I mean by next state. Like as I click this, it keeps cycling through the states in the same direction, but you can also set it up so that it goes backwards as well. Um, if you wanted to do a specific bind, for example, you could add an event here to this and say state machine. We have some options. We have next state, we have previous state, we have set state, where you can say the button is like this button always turns on the cube state. No matter what state it's currently in, if I press this button, I want you to jump to the cube state. And then there's, like I said, you can also do you can go backwards along it. You can set states um, by ID as by both their name or their index. You can set state one or set state cube, whichever is useful. All of the state machine is actually fully accessible from within Lewis scripts as well. So you can augment it with Lewis scripts, or you can use Lewis scripts to control these or tie them together in multiple ways. Um, there's a couple of other options on here. One is you can specify the beginning state. By default, that's going to be the first state, but you may decide, oh, I want you to start on state 2 or state 3, and that will be what happens by default. There's an option for wrap states. That's so that when you reach the end of a state, then it cycles back around, but you can actually turn that off so that when you reach the last state, it just stops. It doesn't cycle back around. Sometimes that's useful. There's a slightly more obscure state option on here called exit states on start. This is actually super useful, although it sounds a little weird. What it means is if so you have a start state when this component initializes and this option is checked, it will automatically call the enter event for the start state, and then it will automatically call the exit event for all of the other states. If this is off, then it won't call those exit events on initialization. It will only call the intro event. Why that's useful is if I just, I'm actually just going to um, stop this real quick. It makes things a lot easier on setup if you have that option to exit the states automatically. So if I'm just looking at this object in the non-running mode, you'll see that it actually has all of the objects visible simultaneously. So that's useful for setting it up. I can see where these objects are and where I want to position them. So I can say, I want the sphere is actually supposed to be over here, and the cube is actually supposed to be over here. If they were turned off, it would be hard to position them or hard to see what they're doing. But when this actually starts running, of course, I only want a single one of these to be visible by default, and that's whichever one is not the starting state. So because all of these states are responsible for their own objects, then I can tell them act as if on startup we've left all of those states and they can all clean themselves up. And otherwise, I would have to come in here and say, okay, well, I know that cube is the default state, so I have to manually turn these off before I upload it. Whereas that's not necessary if the state machine exits all those states by itself. And I'm going to go ahead and restart this here. Like I said, this is probably a lot to take in for people who are not accustomed to doing sort of programmed content. But we will be creating a lot of documentation to go along with this as well. And this is, like I said, fundamental to creating interactive content that is much more elevated than what you can get just with the base components in it. Does anybody have any questions so far? I will show as soon as this logs back in. I will show you some more on there, but I'm gonna check the chat here for questions. Sphere on, sphere off, clap on, clap off. Yeah, it's simple, but it's simple, but it's vital, and it's important for creating content that's more entertaining and more engaging.
I'm fascinated to see that that is what the development environment looks like. I've only ever played with Blender, and I didn't realize you would have a visual sign space window surrounded left, right, bottom, and top with the developing panels. That's cool. Thank you.
Yeah, it kind of is like Blender in a lot of ways in terms of the layout. These panels can be moved around and rearranged as well. It's kind of a personal preference, like where everything is and what you're looking at. Like actually, this is actually extended onto my second monitor as well. There's another window over here that has more information, including like the output console, like the same sort of stuff that you would see showing up in your viewer output log. We can see in real time here. We can see a lot more information that ends up in there as well. So yeah, this is actually what this is what any creator sees essentially when they're creating content. If you've never created content for Science Base, you may have never seen this before, but this is the same as what users see when they download Unity and install our editor pack for creating content as well. This is obviously if I were to dig into this, there's much more going on in here, because this has the entire full viewer in it, all plugins, all code, everything. I'm literally running a full copy of the viewer here. The editor pack runs a cut down copy of the viewer. It still runs exactly like this. You click play and you can walk around in your scene in the editor, even using the editor pack. This is what people see when they're doing that as well. So yeah, this is the standard Sciencebase sort of editing environment. Let me go ahead and put this back in the scene here real quick. So just a quick example of what some of those other things are doing. So that was the button state machine. And if I'm looking at these objects, you'll see that the hold on, let me get this out of the way. Make things a little bigger here. The button itself has its own state machine. And if I go over here to the toggle that's on the screen, it actually has its own completely independent state machine. And again, it doesn't have any specific bindings here because the auto bind is on. So this state machine says, okay, I know that I'm on an object with a toggle. I will automatically connect to that. And when it's connected to a toggle, it automatically adds on-off states to the toggle. So the first state is automatically treated as the on state, and the second state is automatically treated as the off state. So by having a toggle and adding the state machine here, the toggle instantly becomes usable where it was never usable before without a script because it only had a single I changed, but no way to really attach anything to that. And now you have an ability to say, okay, well, when it's on, I have something specific I want you to do. And when it's off, I have something else I want you to do. So you can see here when I switch this toggle off and on, it's changing states depending on whether the toggle is checked or not. So that makes it immediately usable. And then another example is this drop down here. Again, just a standard UI drop down. It has 3 states on it. These are actually the 3 default states that get defined whenever you create a new drop down. It's option A, option B, and option C. And when I drop down this, I can see that those options are indeed in the drop down. Um, Previously, there wasn't really a useful way to do anything with this because again, there was no way to bind actions to each of those drop down options. So with a state machine added on here, again, it has its own state machine separate from the toggle and the button. Then you see I've got states that are defined as option A state, option B state, and option C state. And for these, when they have no exit state, which is not they have no exit event, it's not required. You can only have exit or only enter or both. It doesn't, whatever seems useful. But on this one, when it enters the option A state, it sets a text element to say hi. And if it enters the option B state, then it sets that same text element to say what instead. So you can see here, if I grab this drop down and switch states, the text box below it automatically changes based on the state that I'm in. So now it's very easy to actually make a drop down do something useful because you can actually put actions to go with each of the states that are in there, and you don't have to do any scripting to make this happen. You just say, I've got 3 options here, so I need 3 states down here, and as long as these option names match these state names, then those events will automatically happen as soon as you pick the appropriate option from the drop down menu. And this is just an example of like the other 2 states, they were turning on and off objects. That's very useful. This one could be turning on and off objects, but instead it's changing the text that's on a canvas element. These events could be turning on particles or playing a sound effect, or causing an object to move. Like you may have an animation attached to an object, and switching states can actually directly control that animator as well. So say you've got like an NPC with a walking and a standing and a dancing state. And that's all created in the animator. Those are all animations, but you need some way to switch switch between those animation states. You can actually come in here and I actually could probably drop myself in as a quick example here. Where is myself? I think this is going to be me here. So if I drop in myself, I'm an object with an animator on here. I can come down here to the animator component, and for example, I can say I can reset a trigger. I can play a specific one. So like this, I can say play the dancing state. And if that animator has a dance state on here, then when this happens, it will automatically cause me to start dancing. So basically, and then I could have the same event here where I stop dancing if I leave this state. So you can actually um, control sort of any standard Unity component or even most of our components as well, whether it be particles, sounds, animations, turning objects off and on, moving those objects around, which might be an animation or it might simply just be, relocating the object. Any of that sort of thing is yeah. What is Galen? That's a good one, Galen. What a state you're in now. So that's kind of a brief overview. Like I said, I realize there's a lot going on there, but I hope at least it's got you thinking about some of the ideas for the non-scripters out there who are creators, but not necessarily scripters. How this can enhance what you're working on and give you much more power and more flexibility, especially with things like creating user interfaces and things like that, where previously a lot of those components were simply off limits to you if you didn't know how to script at all. And this makes basically our whole suite of all of Unity's built-in user interface elements and such available to you now without having to have any sort of scripting knowledge.
I have a question before Les jumps in. So you're saying, see, when I look at this screen, and in self-defense, as Dixie, I want you guys to know that I work with three separate programs, music scoring program, a music animator program, and a video editor that are together at least as complicated as this thing is. So,
Sure.
okay. So when you say, well, this is for you people that are not scripters, I'm saying, what do you call yourself? See, I would have said there's 3D modelers, there's 2D uh, image creators, and there's scripters. So I need a new verb. I need a new noun for what
Yeah.
you're doing here because you're saying this isn't scripting. Oh, well, it's not
Yeah.
3D modeling and it's not 2D texturing. What do you call it? And please don't say
Um,
making.
well, I mean, um, I don't know if there's a good verb for it this is developing, this is creating. This is uh it's kind of like Legos. Like you take Legos that are all by themselves not particularly useful, and you snap them together in new and interesting ways. And that's what happens here in this this sort of development environment. Like we provide you with a bunch of different cool Legos, and it's up to you to snap them together in new and creative ways to make that happen. But this is not scripting. Here, I will show you something real quick.
Yeah.
This is scripting. This is actually writing custom code that accomplishes something. It's writing functions. It's actually programming. It's defining all your own variables, defining all your own functions, and deciding what those things do. This is what scripting looks like to a system. So this this is not that clearly. If vernacular needs to be adjusted, that's certainly doable. But when we say scripting, this is what we're talking about right here. This is scripting. Having to know how the Lua language works, all the syntax, all the grammar, having to know um, programming theory in order to make it happen, logic structures, um, being able to know how to manipulate data types, being able to know what not just Lua's built-in API is, but what our ScienceBase API is for accessing Unity objects directly. This is scripting. So
Okay,
I don't know what you want to call this.
I can buy that. I can buy that. But go back to that for a minute. But what I'm seeing is the actual script is inside of a scripting development editor, and I've seen those. So I think the missing word is whatever the box is that the script is inside of, because the other view, if you go back to your science sign space view, you got the same thing. The thing in the middle is what's being created, and the stuff all around it is the developer panels. And I see the same thing I do with my music and that. Um, now I'm intrigued. I don't have an answer, but I'm fascinated. Thank you for showing both those.
Okay.
We
Well,
could
just
call it UI twiddling. UI twiddling. There we
yeah.
go.
Just as a general sort of terminology, typically something where you write code and you can execute that code and see how the code works and whether it does or it doesn't and what the output is, and you can adjust it and run it again. That sort of thing is referred to as an IDE, or an integrated development environment. In many ways, Unity qualifies as an integrated development environment. I got multiple Unities open here. Um, it actually doesn't typically write code directly within itself. For writing code like these components or like the viewer itself, if you try to edit that code within Unity, it will actually launch Visual Studio, an industry standard IDE for doing high level languages like C# and C++ and that kind of thing. Likewise with Lua, if you want to edit Lua scripts, you can write some Lua scripts directly into here, but it's actually much easier to use an integrated development environment like this. This one for Lua code, I typically use Visual Studio Code, which is kind of a lighter, leaner, stripped down version of the full Visual Studio. It can do a variety of languages too, but doing that way, you get things like the syntax highlighting and function autocomplete and things, which just makes the code much easier to read and debug. So yeah, I mean, this sort of box, as you call it, typically is referred to as an IDE. Shorthand is often just referred to as an editor, but then like this is also referred to as the editor. Like the actual name of this program is the unit editor, and that is what all creation and development really takes place in. So I don't know if that's helpful for getting your head around the terminology there, but um, yeah, like I said, this isn't scripting. There's a lot of people who, like you, for example, have never seen this because they've never installed the Unity editor with our editor pack and tried to create content to upload. Um, but then there's a lot of people who have seen this interface and they use it to make things like furniture and clothes and things like that. That all gets made through this interface using a different set of Lego bricks than what we have here. There's a clothing component and a vehicle component and a seat component if you want something to be able to be sat on, like furniture or whatever. And so there's a lot of people who do know this environment and know how to take these Lego bricks, snap them together to build stuff out of the Lego bricks, but they don't know this step of creating their own custom programming code behind it. And so this is meant to be a bridge to go over that gap. Is for people who are comfortable with creating stuff using the Lego bricks, but aren't comfortable actually writing the code that goes behind it.
Yeah, there's a
Does that
whole
help?
heap of scripting codes that you got to remember. Even though I don't remember them all the time, I got to keep looking them up.
Yeah, there's a massive amount of reference material that goes along with this is all stuff that pertains directly to our custom API and does not include any Lua standard stuff. So all of this stuff here is stuff that you have to learn to do scripting on the platform, and there's a lot of it in here. And this is just client-side scripting. There's actually a whole separate document that pertains to doing server-side scripting, which is a whole different experience. But each individually on these, they all have tons of functions and variables, and you have to know how to use them and what they do and what their limitations are and how to tie them together in logic structures and things like that. So there's a lot of people, anything you go and buy on the store, that is somebody who installed this Unity environment, installed our editor pack, and then used these Lego bricks to put stuff together. They put their meshes in the scene, they textured it the way they wanted it to, they attached components to it, maybe to make it sittable or make it move around or have particles or whatever, and then they uploaded it to the platform. So those people are essentially the target audience for these sorts of new Lego bricks, these new components like the state machine, which is going to let them do a lot more creative things without having to do any of this.
We've got some questions in chat.
Let's see here. Interested to know how to get Lua syntax highlighting working if anyone knows. Well, that's going to be depending on what program you're using. Like Visual Studio Code, which I highly recommend, comes with it by default. Any file that has a .lua extension on it will automatically be Lua syntax highlighted. If it's another file, like sometimes people write in .txt files instead, it won't automatically highlight it, but you can turn it on. In the bottom right corner of Visual Studio Code, there's a button here, and right now it says Lua. If it was a text file, it might say none, but if you click that, then it brings up a list of languages, and you can say, I want this to be Lua syntax highlighted, and it will just do that. I also sometimes use Notepad Plus, which is a very very popular program to do that with, and it works the same way. So if I come up here to language, there's a language menu. You can go language L, Lua. Notepad Plus comes with that by default. Visual Studio should as well. I typically don't use Visual Studio for Lua, but you know, if you, it's kind of super overkill. It's way more complicated and all these tools that you'll never use for Lua. So I would highly recommend that you get Visual Studio Code instead.
I
Some
do
people
actually.
use like Writer.
Sorry, I do actually have a tutorial on the wiki of how to set Visual Studio Code up fully with all of our syntax highlighting.
That's great. If you want to drop a link to that in the chat or something,
Yep.
then that'd be a fantastic resource to have. They all have syntax highlighting built into them. There's some extra steps you can go to like import our SDK into it so it does autocomplete and stuff better. But that's not necessary, but it can be useful. Okay, so let's see. There's other questions in here. Yeah, Visual Studio Code is free to download. Anybody can download it and use it. There's no requirement. Also, if you install the Unity editor, which also is free for anybody who's making less than $100,000 a year off of it, which is probably most people, then that also comes with a free copy of the full Visual Studio 2017. Will install along with the editor. So both of those are options that you can get for free. If you've got Unity editor installed, you've already got Visual Studio. And then Visual Studio Code is also a free download. Notepad Plus is also a free download, which is a great multi-tabbed editor as well. I typically do like PHP and Notepad Plus. It's pretty nice. It has built-in FTP and then all that kind of stuff. Let's see. Is there any questions in here that I missed? Did you come up with a new term, Sidearm, for not?
Oh my God, we came up the editor of all creation and development. That was nice, and then we came at development is a batch. That came from Brad, and no, still working on it. I do have a question. You mentioned we had to change the sound here to get out of spatial to enable screen share.
Mm-hmm.
I was curious about that. Why are they going to go together eventually, or what?
There's a very, very long story behind that. The short version is that spatial is not going to be a hard requirement for, or I should say, non-spatial is not going to be a hard requirement for the video share. It just is for the version that you guys are using right now. So. I just set it up for this, but in the future, the actual release version of this won't require a non-spatial zone to do that. There was a very long, complicated technical reason why it was set up that way initially, but we've overcome that limitation and we don't need it anymore.
And then a follow-up question, Mr. President. Okay, we discussed this before. When spatial is enabled, and I was saying it would be nice if I could turn it off and on, and you were explaining you could do the region builder can do that.
Right.
Can you use the new state machine somehow to do that, and I'll tell you why. Use case. We were at Mimi's today, and all of us were at the campfire talking to each other in voice. And then Monks popped in at the TP point, and he couldn't hear, and he had to get close to us because we were in the 70 plus.
Sure.
And sometimes you want to turn the spatial off, and sometimes you want to turn it on. And
Well,
I feel like
it's an interesting example. We wouldn't use this particular component to do like a local per user version, but a region owner can certainly use this component to create a region-wide toggle option for that. What you would have is you would have two um, voice zones, one that's spatial and one that's not. And when the state machine changes, it would turn off one and turn on the other one, and everybody would automatically switch channels to the new one. You can also if you're just relying on the global, you can just have a state where it switches it off and switches it on instead, a single replacement zone instead of, and then when it's off, you're using the global, when it's on, you're using the. So yeah, a region owner or somebody who created a furniture object, because this will work on furniture, not doesn't have to be built into regions, could certainly use the state machine to um, cycle through, just like here, I'm turning off and on a series of objects, a cylinder, a cube, and a sphere. There's no reason that those objects that it's turning off and on couldn't be voice zones with different settings. And then when one gets turned off and then another one gets turned on, you switch into a channel with different characteristics. Does that make sense?
what I heard you say is yes, thank you.
Okay. Yes, it can be done for changing a region wide, or even within an area. Like you could have, a part of a region that's typically part of the global environment, but sometimes you want to isolate it and turn it into its own voice zone. You could have that option to like turn on and off a privacy zone where sometimes people can hear outside of that room, but sometimes they can't. Depending on what option is turned on.
I
There's
think
an
I,
infinite
I think that,
variety of things you can do with it.
could that be made into something either on the in-world store or on the Unity whatchamacallit store assets? So if somebody wrote that, they could like sell it
Sure.
to us.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Somebody could totally make a furniture object out of it, with any of those things I just described and put it on the store, and then you would just log in, edit room, take it out of your inventory, and put it where you want it to. Like, oh, I want it over here to cover this room, or maybe it's a region-wide thing, so it doesn't matter where you put it. You just take it out of your inventory and put it in the region, and it's ready to go. But that could absolutely be a furniture item that's on the store. Sidearms begging, please, somebody make this. Yeah, this would make that super simple to do. That could be done with existing tools or with a script already, but it's messy and not as intuitive. This is just something that would make it a lot easier to do something like that, especially if you had multiple voice zones that you want to be able to switch between. Like maybe you wanted one where sometimes people can hear each other 10 meters away, and sometimes people can hear each other 20 meters away, and sometimes you just don't want spatial at all. You might want to have different levels of spatial in addition to having it on or off entirely. Close, intimate conversations or convention floors. Kind of they have different requirements.
That is the exact use case I'm thinking of is conventions. Um, in another platform that I check out regularly, when the moderator and the speakers are in the huddle, they go into immediate local space that nobody can hear.
Hmm.
Okay, you're gonna be at 5 minutes. Don't run over your time. You're gonna be at 15 minutes. Blah blah blah. And
Hmm.
then they boom turn it on. Welcome to today's conference. The second thing that I've seen done that's just really elegant is okay. Break into your groups. Count off A B C A B C, and table A and B and C are now sound isolated, and then each team does its work, and then say okay, report out time, and boom, they go back on flat spatial, and the whole room can hear. So conferences and working conventions is the
Yeah,
use
we
case I'm thinking of.
yeah we actually have quite a lot of people who are doing those kind of conferences and conventions on the platform on white label grids. We actually have one happening over the next couple days, and then we have some happening next week. We had one happening last week. They're happening on a regular basis, and they do have. very similar setups to that. They have places where it's like, okay, we have an auditorium where everybody goes and there's speakers are presenting and that sort of thing. And then maybe it's time to say, okay, we're going to break into small groups here. Um, the the event coordinators can press a button and it automatically distributes and sorts everyone into pre-designated breakout spaces where, if you're in breakout space A, you can only hear those people, and if you're in breakout space B, you can only hear those people, and they do their thing. And then there's a separate button you can press that recalls everybody back into the global auditorium zone, so that people can discuss their findings, or maybe there's a closing keynote or whatever that's going on there. So yeah, we actually have regions that are built to work essentially exactly the way you're describing. That's actually been something we've been doing a lot this year. And so we're actually over time here, and I do have to jump to another meeting in about 8 minutes. So if anybody has any last minute questions, feel free to throw them out. We will be getting some documentation to go with these new components. There's actually a couple new components. Um, and there will be some more components coming in the future. Like I said, my goal is to make a sort of a generalized networking component, to make that process simpler, because that's a major hurdle for a lot of creators to get over, is not just changing stuff on their screen, but making sure that the same thing changes on other people's screen as well. When that editor pack and that viewer comes out, we'll also make some documentation to go with it. And if you have any ideas for other components that would help simplify these things, then feel free to throw them at us. And if I can find some time someplace, I'll be happy to create as many of these Lego bricks as seem useful, to make content easier to build. Yeah, documentation is definitely going to be important. And this has some documentation built into it. For example, if you mouse over any of these states when it's not in run mode, I think, then that little tooltips will pop up and tell you what each of these options do when you mouse over them. I just don't think it works when it's actually running. Yeah, yeah, I'm trying to put more in component documentation. Um, so on these, say this is non-running state. If I go to like the button, scroll down here. Yeah, so see when I mouse over this, it actually explains what these states are doing. So I'm trying to put more of this in components. So in addition to regular documentation, you can mouse over these and it will, it explains, oh, this one automatically run the exit event on all states except the starting state when this component wrap state. When you reach the last stage, does it or does it not wrap around to the first state again? So we're definitely trying to do more of that, where you can just mouse over and get in component documentation. And I guess we'll leave it there for now. I realize this has been a much more technical office hours than we usually have, but I would like to do this occasionally to highlight new components and highlight ways for people to improve the content they're working on, or make it easier to create the content that they want to make. And so I hope this is useful. But I've got to run off to another meeting, so thank you everyone for coming this week. And uh, next week should be just as exciting. Yeah. Sidearm son has a T-shirt that says "Document my programs." Why do you think we call it code? Yeah, I've had people tell me I write code. I don't write English. That's not what I was hired for. I'm not an English major. Everybody's got an excuse for not documenting their code. Yes, real life beckons for me as well. I have to jump to another meeting, so I'm just going to turn this off now. And thank you, everyone, and take care.